In 1883, the quiet town of Mexico, Missouri was gripped in fear of something strange. A paranormal creature? Surely not, right? It was wearing clothing. But why was it so big? And why did its eyes look the way they did? And to be honest, there might be a tribe of them living in Missouri. Better get on your Sunday best, because today we're looking at the Missouri Wild Man and Friends, here at the Insomnia Society. Mexico, Missouri's name was derived from Texas joining the Union, and in the 1800s was a small settlement of around 6,000 people. Our first sighting comes on the evening of Thanksgiving of 1883 by Mr. and Mrs. Cyrus Haggard in the neighborhood around Hopewell Church, just a few miles from Mexico, Missouri. Returning from the church to their vehicle, they noticed a large, almost 10-foot tall monster man with glittering cat-like eyes and wearing a cloak leaning into their buggy, almost crushing it under its immense size. Its head was said to be bowed in an abstracted way, and although the couple were unharmed, it took weeks for them to recover from their frightening encounter. The next person to see the creature was a man named John Creary. He was a well-respected member of the town, as he had fought under General Ulysses S. Grant in the Civil War. Returning from town on horseback in the late afternoon, he saw the being, about 50 yards ahead of him, walking at a leisurely pace in the center of the road, knee-deep in the mud. As quick as he came upon the creature, it disappeared, vanishing into the thick woods surrounding the path. Even though he had fought in the Civil War, John Creary had stated it was the one time he had ever felt truly afraid, and it was all he could do to control his horse from darting away. Further incidental sightings were reported, but the main question remained. Some people of Mexico thought they were dealing with some sort of creature, and the others thought it was a ghost. Determined to find out, a large party was gathered and led by Bob White, a local politician, and Jake Merkel, a local farmer, as well as several journalists. A tracker in the area had claimed that the monster lived in the hills behind the farm of a Mr. Phillip, and they set out to begin the hunt. The results of which were reported in the local paper. It was supposed that the habitation of the monster was pretty definitely known, and little doubt existed that the wild man, or whatever the thing may be, had a home in a cave in the hills but recently discovered. But this was proved a mistake. The cave was searched thoroughly, but no evidence found that it has been made a home by anything but wild animals, which are plentiful in the woods of the region. A few days later, a man named Anton Bradshaw was returning from town late at night and saw the creature sitting upright, almost perched, on the fence in front of Hopewell Church. Its head was bowed, and Bradshaw had thought it looked as though it was meditating. He quickly spun his horse and took off in the direction of a nearby neighbor's house for safety. After this encounter, Hopewell Church and the adjoining school were closed due to fear of the creature, and even armed farmers didn't dare to venture out after dark. Over Christmas of 1883, there were more incidental sightings, including one where the aforementioned politician Bob White mistook a shadow for a ghost at Hopewell Church and fainted in front of a large crowd of people. Needless to say, panic had taken the town. The next month, in January of 1884, the son of John Creary contacted the Mexico Weekly Ledger. He said he had found a giant coat while out deer hunting near Hopewell Church. It was said to be made of the hides of bear, buffalo, elephant, kangaroo, and tiger. But whether this is an exaggeration by the paper or John's son is debated. The sightings then stopped for a few months. There were murmurs of something local happening, and hunting parties set up by wealthy benefactors and organizations continued to patrol the woods, but it seemed to have gone. Then, in August 28th of 1884, the Mexico Weekly Ledger published a small item. We understand that John Creary has bought the haunted hill immediately west of Philip Brown's residence. Out in what is known as the Ghost District west of Mexico, Missouri, it would seem a fated hill over which traverses the main county road. In a conversation this morning with a well-known farmer who resides in the vicinity, which this could possibly be Philip Brown, he stated that within the past year, there had been no less than 50 disastrous runaways on this particular hill, and that the old fragments of wagons and buggies could be seen lying around in all directions. Several persons, too, have been injured, the result of teams of horses becoming frightened and tearing away at breakneck speed down the narrow perpendicular space. But what was really happening at Haunted Hill? These are a few stories. Two young ladies, the Mrs. Stevens, were thrown from their buggy by a spectral force, leaving one with a severe ankle fracture and their buggy to be smashed. In another, an earlier witness to the wild man, Anton Bradshaw and his family, were returning home when their two workhorses became spooked and bolted. No one was injured, but their buggy too was destroyed. A Mr. Reed had stopped to let his horse drink from the ford close to the hill. The horse suddenly began to kick and tear around the water. It took a while before he was able to calm it, and when he did, it went into a death-like stupor for almost an hour before recovering. But what it had seen or heard, Mr. Reed did not. Mr. Childress wasn't so lucky. He was at a creek at the foot of the hill when his wagon was overturned by a powerful ethereal force, spilling its contents into the creek and sending his horses mad like Mr. Reed's. Sadly, he was unable to calm his frightened horses, and they were lost, running off into the woodline. If this wasn't enough, the wild man returned to Hopewell Church just a few days before Christmas in 1884. The paper writing, "A well-known gentleman of this city, driving over the road at nightfall, encountered an apparition, gigantic in height, ethereal in substance, long cloaked and booted, which approached and rested familiarly on the box of his buggy. It kept pace with a rapid, and in this case an exceedingly terrified horse, and then disappeared, how or whence the gentleman was perhaps in no condition to discover." The local papers also reported that Haunted Hill should in no means be traveled by night. It shouldn't even be contemplated, with the mysterious accidents on the hill being attributed to the wild man. With one article stating, "The Haunted Hill is situated 2 miles west of Mexico, Missouri, in the Ghost District, which derived its name last fall from a strange creature roaming at large, it is said, through the wood of the locality, frightening the inhabitants nearly out of their wits, in which mystery was never fathomed, although day after day and night after night, hunting parties were out scouring the thickly wooded, sparsely settled neighborhood. The Haunted Hill, as they call it, is merely a sequence to the appearance of the mysterious personage of last fall." And, as we sometimes see in the cases of the paranormal, there were other, more creative descriptions of what was causing the accidents of Haunted Hill. With one paper describing the creature as, "He is mounted on a pale horse. He is a gigantic figure, clad in pure white, apparently floating in the air. He is a grisly skeleton, surmounted by a ghastly death's head in the shape of an especially horrible grinning skull." If you're enjoying the video, please make sure to hit like, subscribe, and the notification bell so you don't miss any stories from the weird world of the paranormal. Okay, back to the video. From there, the story goes cold for a few years, returning in 1888 with a story from the Mexico Weekly Ledger. For years, the hill was known to be haunted. With the coming of the first frost in September, great moanings and wailings would emanate from the mysterious hill, and belated travelers would at night hear terrible noises and witness blood-curdling sightings in the strip of woods that cover the wonderful place. Strong men of courage frequently equipped themselves with weapons and armor and would endeavor to drive from their haunts the mysterious being that made Haunted Hill their nightly rendezvous. But it was always in vain. The parties always returned empty-handed. But this time it didn't seem to be isolated incidents, with the paper stating, "Year after year, the ghosts held high carnival. With the coming of frost, and until late the next year, the hill was a place of terror." John Creary seems to have owned the land directly behind the church, and our final mention of the event comes from the same article. It was about 3 years ago, and John, who then lived in the Ghost District, who took a band of ghost hunters up Haunted Hill but returned back in the morning unrewarded. All the fall and winter passed, and there were no supernatural manifestations. The delightful mystery surrounding the Haunted Hill and Ghost Hollow still existed but grew no deeper. Another winter came and no more ghosts. Only the legend remained. But what was it? Well, of course we always have that it could have been a hoax, but there's a couple issues with this. During this time period, it's a small, tight-knit religious community spread over a few miles. If someone was to be hoaxing it, it wouldn't take long for it to spread around town and that person to be punished for their actions. Or, even worse, they get caught by one of the many gangs of hunters looking to take home an exotic trophy. There's no word on what happened to the jacket that was found, but it seems unlikely that the son of John Creary would have faked that. I'm no hunter, but it would seem odd to want to draw random people and curious onlookers onto your hunting lands messing with the wildlife. But there is a possible connection to another story, the Blue Man of Spring Creek in the southern part of Missouri. It comes to us from an article printed in the Springfield Leader on November of 1924 of a story taking place in 1865. A hunter named Saul Collins was hunting between the Big North Fork and Spring Creek in Missouri when he came across a set of tracks he thought were bear tracks. Following them for hours, he began climbing a hill and barely had time to leap behind a tree as a huge boulder came rumbling down past him. A second followed behind, and a third, crashing into the tree so hard the boulder shattered into 100 pieces. When he peered around the tree, on the hillside, was a huge figure shaped like a man covered head to toe in curly black hair, which when struck by the sun gave off a blue hue, which is where it gets its name. But something you don't often see is what he reported next. It was wearing the hides of animals around its waist, and other wrappings around its feet like shoes. It threw another rock which smashed against the tree, and Collins said it, quote, made the hills echo with an ear-splitting scream, more terrifying than ever came from any wild beast that roams the woods. After that, he had enough and took off down the mountain. Over the course of several days, him and his neighbors tracked the Blue Man and spotted him many times, but he was never caught. It was believed he was stealing the local livestock, and after 2 weeks of terror, he vanished. For 16 years after, there were sporadic sightings of the being along the Big Fork, and then he disappeared completely between 1890 and 1911, only to return one last time. Fed up with the terror, a huge search party had thought they had it cornered in its den in a remote valley, but like before, it was gone. This time for good. So what do you think? The comparisons are close. Both are in the same state, both were wearing clothing, and both were described pretty much the same way. Granted, the Haunted Hill is connected. It means each made terrible howling noises. And they were both seen around the same time period. The cool part is, we have an origin for the Blue Man of Spring Creek. The story comes from an old Uncle Jerry Hildebrand, who settled in what is now Douglas County in 1820, and sadly passed away there in 1885. His story was recounted in the same article. The story goes, some years before the American Revolution, while Missouri was still part of the French colony of Louisiana, a French fur trader came into the Ozarks bringing with him a very beautiful Spanish woman. Tiring of her, he sold her away to a native chief for a package of furs and left. The woman, distraught at what had happened, slowly lost her mind and lived as a creature of the woods. Intermingling with the local natives, a race of half Spanish, half native were born, and these people stayed far away from both the French and the other natives, hiding out in remote places, increasing their numbers. When the pioneer settlers poured into the Ozarks from 1820 to 1840, the strange people disappeared, and it was generally supposed by those who knew anything about them that they migrated into more remote and unsettled depths of the wilderness. The Boston Mountains in western Arkansas were thought to be the place which they had retreated to. From these people, probably the last of their race, came the Blue Man of Spring Creek. So, do you think they're connected? Is it a Bigfoot, or possibly closer to a spirit? Or maybe there's a tribe of hidden people living tucked away in the Ozarks? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you're new here, please make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss another story from the paranormal world. It gets weird out there, so stay safe, guys.